My questions led to the firing of Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard. That hearing then became the hearing heard around the world.
Hang on a second. What will the withholding of federal funds do to combat religious discrimination?
These schools are not entitled to those U.S. taxpayer dollars. The only way they're going to address the rot is if they're forced to.
What standards should Congress have when allegations like this appear?
Any member that has this type of behavior, they need to resign.
Welcome back to The Brief. We have a really special guest today, a friend of mine, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, the author of this excellent new book, Poison Ivies. Before we get into the episode, though, I want to make sure you are liking, subscribing, and otherwise following our content to ensure you do not miss a single new episode of The Brief. And with that, we are joined today by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Congresswoman Stefanik represents New York's 21st Congressional District. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This is a very important book, as you know, and I'm excited to have it in the world because it's an important book for today in higher education, but also for history about what happened on these college campuses post-October 7th when Hamas attacked Israel.
Absolutely. And that's actually a great way to set up the first question, because you write in the introduction to your book a really shocking statistic that I myself did not know. A September 2025 Gallup poll found only a third of Americans think college education is, quote, very important. That is down from 75% a decade ago. So you've clearly been the expert and the leader in this field. How did we get here? Why is there so much mistrust amongst the American people pertaining to higher education in the United States?
Well, that's exactly the crux of the book, Shabbos. These schools have fundamentally lost their way. Instead of focusing on academic excellence and academic rigor, they've become centers for not only political indoctrination, as they've increasingly become more and more radical far left, but frankly, they've embraced anti-Americanism. As we saw after October 7th, pro-Hamas encampments took over many of these schools. There was a skyrocketing of anti-Semitism, oftentimes fueled by professors or Middle Eastern studies programs funded by foreign dollars, as well as propped up by U.S. taxpayers. It's not reflective of the American people's values. And frankly, these schools are not entitled to those U.S. taxpayer dollars. They have to abide by civil rights laws protection. So it goes into all of that. It's a real indictment of what were considered historically elite institutions like Harvard, which you and I are very familiar with, like Penn, like Columbia. Those are the bad apples. But importantly, at the end of the book, I end on a positive note of schools that are getting it right, like Vanderbilt, like University of Florida, like University at Austin. So if you watch that hearing heard around the world with those university presidents, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, many of whom were subsequently fired, you will be interested in this book.
Yeah, I do want to get to that, but just before we do it, as you said, you're no stranger to Harvard University. You were a student there, of course, but you also ignited your own controversy within the university a couple of years back when they removed you from the Institute of Politics board. Can you talk a little bit about your experience being silenced and then just the general toleration or lack thereof of pro-Trump conservative voices within American institutions of higher learning today?
Absolutely. I was part of the cancel culture of the left in these woke universities. If you look at the fact that after the 2020 election, and I gave a floor speech focused on constitutional issues and election integrity, they removed me from a quote-unquote bipartisan board. I was previously the only Trump voter who sat on that bipartisan board, so that was part of the cancellation. And fast forward a few years later, my questions led to arguably the firing of Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard. But what really struck me, Shabbos, is they're so quick to say, we protect freedom of speech only when it calls for the genocide of Jews. But when it's a conservative voice, they have a record a mile long of canceling the speech and pushing them out.
And to your point, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions, which you brought up in the hearing, they ranked Harvard University dead last when it came to free speech. So the sudden investment in the First Amendment is kind of surprising. So let's talk about that congressional hearing. You and Chairwoman of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, you held a hearing on December 5th. It was entitled Holding Campus Leaders Accountable and Confronting Anti-Semitism. What would you tell us was the impetus for that hearing, and what were you looking to get out of that congressional hearing?
The impetus for the hearing was hearing from so many students across the country and what they were facing on these college campuses, whether it was the physical harassment, the verbal harassment, physical assaults, the drawing of swastikas on doors. I mean, really the targeted violence against American Jewish students on these campuses. People couldn't go to class. Individuals had to hire private security. It was unrecognizable to me, not just what was happening at Harvard, where I'm an alumna, but schools across the country. And I believed it was important to haul in those university presidents who failed to show leadership. And of course, that hearing then became the hearing heard around the world. 1 billion people, 1 billion views of that horrific, morally bankrupt testimony that they refused to answer my question correctly. And the question was this: does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct? And the world remembers what they said. They should have answered yes without equivocating. And they said essentially it depends on the context. And that created a firestorm unlike anything we've ever seen in higher education. But I do think it invigorated this movement towards higher education reform, which we're undergoing right now.
So, Congresswoman, if that was the hearing heard around the world, you certainly asked the question heard around the world, where you infamously asked the 3 presidents of Harvard, Claudine Gay, Penn, Liz McGill, and MIT, Sally Kornblue, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate their university's rules on bullying and harassment?
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
The answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
And what I did not know, this was in the book, A, you were sick that day, B, this is towards the very end of the hearing, and C, that wasn't even meant to be a trick question. So can you just explain, what do you think prompted those 3 presidents to answer in the way that they did? And what is sort of like the insider baseball? What prompted you to ask this most basic, obvious question?
Well, people were there for the whole hearing, and it was a day-long hearing, and I had done so many rounds of questions and had not gotten direct answers from then Harvard's president, Claudine Gay. Members organically on the Republican side started yielding me their time because I was so in-depth on the issue and had spent so much time preparing and had the experience as a Harvard graduate myself, just knowing the inner workings of the university as well as the alumni and the students there. I thought to myself, okay, how can I ask this in the most straightforward, simplest way possible, not a political question, but a moral one? And I thought they were going to answer yes to the question, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct? I was planning on following up when I thought they would say yes of, why haven't you taken disciplinary action? But I didn't have the opportunity to follow up because they answered so abysmally. And what was really eerie about it was there were hardly any people in the committee hearing room at that point because it was the end of the day. There was hardly any media, just the C-SPAN cameras. Those university presidents stood up, didn't realize anything they said was wrong, and went on their way, which to me highlights the disconnect. Because you take my constituents, a farmer, a mom, a small business worker, they know how to answer that question without hesitation. Something is deeply wrong with the higher education ecosystem at the most elite level if you have that type of failure on display and they don't even realize it. And then you would think, Shabbos, that after that hearing, they would start fixing these institutions. No, they circled the wagons and dug deeper and deeper and deeper into this moral abyss.
So on that note, Congresswoman, on December 10th, Harvard's Board of Overseers and the corporation, which is actually led by Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's sister, Penny Pritzker, they met to determine the fate of then-President Claudine Gay. And they agreed that she should stay to, quote, keep in the broader Harvard administration stable, including its composition. She is the right leader to help our community heal. And what's fascinating, I learned this in the book, is then-President Gay secretly began a personal attack campaign against you. She called you a purveyor of hate. She said you support the Proud Boys. Not sure where she got that from. So you call the corporation's oversight as having rotten from within. They throw their moral and academic integrity completely by the wayside. So as someone who went to Harvard, how did we get here?
Well, you talk about that's a really important behind-the-scenes moment in this book because one of the individuals that called the board members to encourage Harvard to protect Claudine Gay, that would be Barack Obama, who actually took the time to call the board members, many of whom served in his cabinet or were part of his finance team, many Obama officials, and say, don't give her a win, her meaning me, and to keep the Harvard administration stable. That's also in the book. This is also amidst the plagiarism scandal of Claudine Gay that was brewing and revealed at the same time that the Harvard Corporation actually knew about prior. And yes, it leaked to me almost in real time, and we've now seen that with some of the subpoena documents and emails that she attacked me and blamed me for her horrific answers. So how did we get here? It's been a long backward slide. It didn't happen overnight. Part of it is the regime of DEI, which is at its core anti-Semitic, and it moves away from academic and merit exceptionalism. It is part of the foreign dollars flowing into these institutions. It's also part of the faculty tenure program, where you have increasingly further and further to the left self-selecting the professors in these departments that frankly get so radically far outside of the center that it's no longer representative of the reality or frankly American values. You also have a failure of disciplinary action, and you have very insular board procedures, governance procedures of how these boards, which should have fiduciary responsibility for the universities, how they essentially have become completely rudderless and have not focused on the founding missions of these schools. In the case of Harvard, that would be veritas, truth, moral truth, and have just shifted so far away.
So, Congresswoman, I do want to get to the foreign funding, but just before I do, I'm just curious, because then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told Manu Shafiq, who is the president of Columbia University, that your efforts into investigating religious discrimination at American institutions of higher learning is a Republican witch hunt. And he told her, just keep your head down. This will all be over after the elections when presumably Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would win. So what would your message be to your Democratic colleagues as to why this should have been a bipartisan issue?
Well, historically, it was a bipartisan issue for many, many years, Shabbos. And now, particularly as we're seeing in the state of New York, the anti-Semitic socialists have hijacked the Democrat Party. And Chuck Schumer, I mean, look at those words. Manu Shafiq was pushed out of a job within the next year after she testified. And I remember she was not at that first hearing. The book talks about this. And the New York Times hailed about how smart it is that the Columbia president avoided the fate of Harvard, Penn, and MIT. She had her opportunity under oath, and boy, did it did not go well for Columbia, which had one of the worst pro-Hamas encampments with riots and property destruction and anti-Semitic crimes committed against Jewish students at Columbia, as well as Jewish professors. So, Chuck Schumer is the least popular elected official in New York State, if my polling is correct. That's what I hear from every district. And it's disappointing, but it's frankly telling about where today's Democrat Party is. It has shifted so far, and it has embraced these radical anti-Semites. And I will tell you, every day I hear from New York State Democrat people, Democrat voters who support the work that I'm doing.
Absolutely. Let me go back then to the foreign funding. So the Department of Education, they released new findings, and it showed, I want to make sure I get this right, there has been $62.4 billion in foreign funding to American institutions of higher learning. Qatar alone is the top giver, more than $7 billion to U.S. universities. So to what extent, if any, and I know you talk about this in the book, but to what extent has the foreign funding, especially from adversarial countries, Qatar, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, how has that sowed the discord and the unrest that we have seen on American campuses?
And I talk about this in the book. That's one of the driving factors. And with those foreign dollars come strings attached in the curricula that's taught, in the professors that are hired, in the centers that the funding goes to. What we've done as a Congress is we've tightened up many of those loopholes, made sure that there's more transparency. That's why you have the Department of Education putting out that report and showing how significant the funding is. That's the first step, is shining sunlight and a spotlight and transparency. But take the case of Northwestern, or take the case of Georgetown, both of which rely on significant dollars from Qatar. That limited the university's ability to speak out against the Hamas attacks against Israel, and they kind of coordinated in their communications efforts. That is unacceptable. These institutions were founded as American institutions. They want to think of themselves as global. They are not. They rely on U.S. taxpayer funds, and that needs to be remembered and understood. And the way we do that is by using the leverage of taxpayer dollars, which we have effectively done, as has the Trump administration.
So it's not just the foreign funding, but it's also the foreign students, which I know you've been outspoken against. The United States hosts roughly 1.5 million international students at American colleges, which is about 7% of U.S. higher education. What do we do about the increase in foreign students on our campuses, but in particular, those like Mahmoud Khalil, who came into our country to violate our laws? How can we reform this both politically and also culturally?
A foreign visa for a student, or frankly for anyone, is a privilege. It is not a right. Mahmoud Khalil, I've said he should be deported going back to 2023, and that needs to happen. These judges who are standing in our way, it is Absolutely unacceptable. They need to be deported. If you are in the United States as a foreign student and are part of this anti-American, anti-Semitic, frankly, I believe criminal behavior, you need to be deported immediately. How do we solve this over the long term? I think you have to cap the percentage of foreign students at no more than 15% for each institution. If you look at Columbia, 40% of students there are foreign students. That is no longer prioritizing American students, which again, going back to the founding missions of these universities, it was in many cases predating the American Revolution. People like Alexander Hamilton were a part of the founding of Columbia. They've strayed so far away from that. So the cap is important at 15%, and the deportations is important as well for those foreign visas, those students who are here that are part of this anti-Americanism on these campuses.
Yeah, I would also add there was a disturbing article from the Wall Street Journal a couple months ago that showed that there are so many Chinese Communist Party officials at the Harvard Kennedy School, the School of Government and Public Policy, that they literally referred to Harvard as, quote, their party school. So accurately diagnosing the problem there. Let me get back to something you've been mentioning a couple of times. So President Trump issued an executive order in January of 2025 that put U.S. universities on notice. The White House launched investigations into 5 schools. Those 5 schools turned into 60 schools. And he's withheld billions of dollars in federal funding from Harvard, from Columbia, Northwestern, Cornell, Brown. What's your response to university presidents or to students who say, hang on a second, what will the withholding of federal funds do to combat religious discrimination, anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism? That's just, hurting innocent students who are in the STEM field, for example. What would your response be to those students who are saying that there is no a connection between the withholding of federal funds and then the comprehensive reform that these universities need to undergo?
Well, these universities had an opportunity to fix themselves. At every opportunity, they failed further and further. They dug themselves deeper and deeper. We saw when this happened in October to December of 2023 and all throughout 2024, this was during the Biden administration years, the schools did not address these. The only way they're going to address the rot is if they're forced to. We helped craft the executive order by President Trump that was issued on day one that was ready to go. Much of it was based upon my oversight work in those committee hearings, specifically the investigation of these Ivy League schools, the poisoned Ivies. And I support every aspect of it because the schools will fail to fix themselves. You have to use the leverage of U.S. taxpayer dollars.
One last question on Harvard specifically, because anytime you're on TV or on these shows, I can guarantee the Harvard Board of Corporation, they're watching you very closely. What would you say to Alan Garber, the current president of Harvard University? You, in your book, talk about he visited you in your office. He did not think that President Trump would win, and certainly he was wrong about that. But what would you say directly to him today as it pertains to how Harvard is being run as a university?
You have a real problem at Harvard when in certain departments you have an 88-to-1 ratio of liberal professors to those that identify as conservatives, if you even have the one. I would also say to Alan Garber, enforce the rules. Enforce the rules that are on the books because they failed to do that as well. And my goodness, if you look at the Harvard Corporation in terms of those that have oversight of the university, it's all like-minded people who are part of the radical far-left ecosystem. That is not acceptable. And frankly, people are voting with their feet in their wallets. Harvard is going to continue to lose applicants who are the best and the brightest, who are now applying to Vanderbilt and University of Florida and University at Austin. And that reputational damage is going to be long-lasting. I say this as someone, I had a great experience as an undergraduate at Harvard. It just became unrecognizable 20 years later, what we have seen on these campuses.
And I'm so glad you said that because there are so many unfair attacks leveled against you and the Trump administration that you're after higher education in the United States. And nothing could be further from the truth because you talk about institutions of higher learning in the United States that are excellent, like the ones you just mentioned, Vanderbilt, University of Florida. It's just the ones that are violating the civil rights of their own students. Those are the ones we're attacking. Before I let you go, let's just talk about kind of the elephant in the room here. And that is 2 colleagues of yours in the House, or former colleagues, I should say. That's Congressman Eric Swalwell of California and Tony Gonzales of Texas. What do you make of their personal scandals? And then just generally speaking, what standards should Congress have when allegations like this appear? Because some people, both on the right and on the left, are upset that Eric Swalwell sort of feels that he can just drop out of the race for governor in California, just resign from Congress, and there goes all the allegations. So what should the standards be in the future?
The standards need to be much higher. This goes all the way up to the leadership in terms of there needs to be a stronger ethics process in general. It used to be the case, and I've been through 6 different speakers, that the speaker would haul them in and the person would resign. Now, in the case of Swalwell, this is a protege of Nancy Pelosi. This was known among his Democrat colleagues, and they need to be called to the mat about this horrific, arguably criminal behavior against his staff, against other women who have come forward. But it shows that the mainstream media, Swalwell ran for president, let's not forget, Shabbos, and there was absolutely no scrutiny whatsoever. In the Tony Gonzales situation, incredibly unacceptable. He should have resigned much sooner. And any member that has this type of behavior, they need to resign. They know if they have behaved unlawfully or have they behaved inappropriately, they should resign. And I'll tell you, as someone in elected office, you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. And by the way, we have rules and laws on the books that we've passed legislation for that apply to members of Congress. And frankly, those need to be abided by, and they, in these cases, have not been.
Well said. Let me ask you a really last question, then I'll let you go. You were set to be the UN ambassador, and then you stayed in the House to protect the Republican majority at the request of President Trump. Many New Yorkers, myself included, were excited to vote for you for our next governor. So I'm just curious if you're open to sharing, what does the political future hold for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik? Will we be able to vote for you again in the future?
Well, certainly, I'm not ruling that out. It's been a tremendous honor representing New York's 21st District, being the highest-ranking New York Republican in over 100 years. And certainly, I've been proud to step up and put America first, and frankly, New Yorkers first, by holding this House majority, by delivering the largest tax cut in history for New Yorkers in particular, with the raising of the state and local tax deduction. I'm proud of this book, Poisoned Ivies, which is part of the work that I've conducted while I've been in elected office, talking about higher education reform. And I'm going to continue to be engaged in the debate. So this is just chapter 1 for me, Shabbos. And I'm excited for what's next and being able to serve in new ways. So stay tuned. But right now I'm on the book launch, and I hope you'll purchase Poisoned Ivies. You can get more information on EliseStefanik.com.
Absolutely. And I got to say, I'm a little embarrassed because I was so excited to read your book, I accidentally ripped the front cover. That's how excited I was.
I'll send you a new one.
I appreciate it. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik represents New York's 21st Congressional District and is the author of this newly released book. You must get it. Poisoned Ivy is the inside account of the academic and moral rot at America's elite universities. Congresswoman Stefanik, I want to thank you not just for coming on the show today, but being a friend and being a champion for the American Jewish community. We really do appreciate it.
Of course, I try to highlight these incredible students who were courageous and came forward. Please order it today. It's a riveting behind-the-scenes look on a really important issue, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Take care.
Bye.
Well, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or if you want to see a particular topic addressed, make sure to put it down in the comments, and feel free to keep the conversation going through all of your questions or yellings or rants. Find me on social media. Just type in Shabbos Kestenbaum. You're not going to find many other Shabbos Kestenbaums, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you all very soon.